Hello, welcome back to Bumblebee, where today I'll be guiding you through the top 10 unsettling Viking rituals you never knew about. Number 10 is suspicious hygiene. Well, at least it was suspicious to others, but to the Scandinavians and their Vikings, it was actually incredibly common and important. They had a weekly regimen for their cleaning their bodies or the cleaning of their clothes. This is where the unsettling part does come in though. See, in traditional Nordic beliefs, it is suggested that since you never knew the day of your death, you should always look your best for the inevitable arrival in the afterlife. This is because when you die, you will be in the presence of your gods and any soul that has departed before you. So by dressing and grooming yourself daily in a clean manner, you ensure that you would not have to be ashamed. And it also had cosmic significance in maintaining order and staving off the cataclysm of Ragnarok, which would end the world. So to break that down, they were hygienic because however they died is how they would meet their gods, looking like that, and also it would help prevent an apocalypse. Okay, so the Viking reputation for being well groomed comes from Christian accounts condemning such behavior as vain and posturing, which seduced Christians into emulating their evil pagan ways, and doing so angered the Christian god. In reality, chroniclers were just pissed that the Vikings were kicking their asses and stealing their women. A famous example of this resentment towards Viking superiority and, well, hygiene is after some Vikings did a sacking of a monastery in 793. Scholar Alcuin wrote multiple letters to English kings denouncing those Christians who had begun dressing and caring for themselves as the pagan Vikings did, since this obviously incurred God's wrath. What you give is whatever you get with number 9, blot sacrifices. The concept of this ritual is an exchange. By sacrificing to the gods with certain items or certain requests, the Vikings could receive something in return. Sometimes it'd be a request for fertility or goodwill regarding the weather or the harvest. Sometimes it was luck in battle. It's believed that there are 4 of these blots that were done during the year at the time of the autumn and spring equinox and the summer and winter solstices. One of the few documented blots in history is documented by Icelander named Snorri in the early 1200s, who described how all the farmers of the area had gathered at the temple to make sacrifice, and a meal was provided by Sigurd Hakansson, a generous man of wealth. Multiple animals were sacrificed, primarily horses, and the blood was collected all in bowls, being that the participants used twigs to splatter the blood along the stone altars, walls, and the participants themselves. Then they cooked the meat via boiling in cauldrons and blessed it by a god's priest, and then some was eaten by all in attendance. Beer was also blessed, then consumed with it. They would make a toast to Odin and decree to the king and victory before emptying cups for Njord and Freyj to secure a prosperous and peaceful future. After all was done, they made final toasts to their kin who had now been resting in burial mounds. Number 8 is worshipping whites. So Nordic history is sadly lost because of how Christianity colonized the country. When they invaded, they didn't just erase history, they actually buried it. So cultural hubs and temples were made of wood and they were torn down and burned on the spot. Then on their exact foundations, new wooden churches were built. Those were later torn down or fell from natural elements, and new stone churches were built on those foundations. When those crumbled, they buried history even further beneath the foundation. During this Christianization, the missionaries were more focused on suppressing the belief of named gods like Thor, Odin, Frigga, you get the idea. But smaller collectives of deities got to continue on without awareness of Christian authorities for a little. This is why we have some paper documentation of the worship of whites. Whites were protective deities on areas of land, and there were many religious rules for how to deal with them to avoid conflicts. It's debated what whites are fully. Some say they are undead ghosts or they're nature spirits. What's agreed upon is their claim as land protectors. They are tied to the landscape, often to a certain rock or a mountain or even a valley itself. When Egil Skallagrimsson was driven from Norway to exile in Iceland, he decided to piss off some rights in revenge. He erected a knitting pole on white land to frighten and enrage them, bringing all of Norway bad luck. It's said Iceland is protected by 4 of these whites, and they have taken the form of a bull, eagle, dragon, and giant that will kill or decimate any invaders attempting to approach. They are depicted on Iceland's coat of arms. Piss or get off the pot is number 7. Like the ancient Greeks, the Vikings also had a portable and creative fire that they equipped towards enemies. Unlike Greek fire, which still remains unexplained, we figured this one out, and I'm sure you can guess what it is from the title. I have no idea what they were doing or trying to accomplish, but when Vikings boiled a bunch of urine with a piece of tree bark fungus called touchwood together for days on end, that fungus could then be pounded flat fat into a strip of like felt material. Then these pieces of material could be ignited and literally tossed around. Again, no idea how they came across this combination or why they were boiling it in the first place. All we know is that this is what they figured out. Anyways, these urine-saturated strips were flammable due to the sodium nitrate in urine. Paired with the spores in the mold, they created a smolder effect instead of an inferno. So they were quite convenient for setting campfires or portable fuel for cooking rigs. Either way, the Vikings carried piss grenades, and I think that's pretty wild. Number 6 makes me cringe. It's tooth modification. As aforementioned, Vikings cared a lot about their appearances, bleaching hair, combing beards, herbs in the armpits, ironing clothes with rocks, and apparently modifying their teeth. What do I mean by modification? Well, prepare to flinch like crazy because archaeologists have found multiple Viking skulls where there are intentional shape changes to teeth or grooves, dots, and other patterns carved into them. It's primarily been the top front teeth, and researchers believe that the grooves were filled with dyes like reds and purples. Due to the Christianization I previously described, there are no records explaining this practice, and it's unknown to us until we even discovered these skulls with modifications. There is some assumption that maybe it was earned or associated with a level of status, perhaps even used by warriors to incite fear in their opposition. What we do know is this practice was not seen anywhere else in the Caucasus and European regions at that time, and further information just remains lost. Gather around the Yule log for number 5, Yule itself. That fun little YouTube video a lot of people put on their TV whilst opening presents Christmas morning is actually its own holiday. Yule is a period between winter solstice and the blot ritual done for that solstice. It's speculated to be somewhere around January 12th each year. The reason it's celebrated, once again, is lost to history, but speculation is that it honors the dead, the new year, and to celebrate Thor and the coming sunlight he brought as days become longer. We know that there's a multi-day feast and alcohol paired with singing and games. Vikings would make a sun wheel that they would set on fire and roll down a hill in honor of the sun's return. Sounding like a party to me. Naturally, they made Yule logs decorated with yews, hollies, and firs alongside carved runes. A piece of this Yule was kept every year until the next Yule to protect the family and be the start of the first fire of next year. Yule is actually the basis for most Christmas traditions. The Yule log, decorating a Christmas tree, ornaments, caroling, making cookies, so much more. This is actually because when Christianity was forcing its way in, they needed to up conversion, but no one was interested in monotheism. So they created Christmas, and they used the Yule traditions as a basis in order to convince people to convert. They also took St. Nicholas and the concept of stockings, which were boots originally, from Eastern Europe and the Balkan region to convert them. Clever Christians used people's pre-existing cultures under a new name to have them join them for a lot of different things. What they didn't take, however, was the unsettling detail that every 9th year of Yule, it was customary for Swedish kings to sacrifice men at the temple of Uppsala. 9 heads would be offered to the gods, with the bodies hanging out of the temple's sacred grove. This would go on for 9 days, totaling 81 sacrifices that would be accompanied by feasts and Yule festivities. Number 4 is Zombie Avoidance 101. A suspicious amount of cultures speak of the undead creatures rising at night to torment the living that can't enter a door without being invited. It makes you wonder what they saw that we didn't. Called Draugr, Scans and Vikings lived on the assumption once any corpse was buried, it would become animated again. If it were peaceful, then it was called a hogboy, and it would innocently reside in its grave to protect it from robbers. However, when they weren't peaceful, they were Draugr, wandering away from its burrow to harm any human it could find. Precautions to avoid this included pieces of straw placed in cross formations under the burial shroud, a pair of open scissors placed across the chest, the big toes tied together, and even nails poked into the bottom of feet to make walking out impossible. Even how the coffin bearers would stop before leaving with the coffin, raising it 3 times in different directions, would symbolize a cross. Since Vikings believed the dead could only return the same way that they came, it was believed that the deceased wouldn't be able to enter a house without invitation, and a body carried out feet first wouldn't properly see the route back from its burial mound. Once the deceased was out those doors, any jars, saucepans, cauldrons, chairs, clothes, anything used by the deceased that others would later be using was turned upside down. Number 3 is the baby trials, and yeah, I literally mean a baby going through trials. Like, don't get me wrong, it's not the Olympics, the baby didn't have to like throw a spear or man a Viking ship, but they did have to be accepted and acknowledged as a real person. Norse didn't consider babies as humans the second they're born. This may seem strange to us now, but that mentality likely spared immeasurable grief as natural mortality was so high. By having emotional distance, parents were able to protect themselves, an important perspective to remember. With a happy, healthy, and alive baby, the Norse went through a few rituals to humanize it. First, the baby was sat on the ground until the father picked up the child and placed him inside his coat or cloak. This symbolized the father accepted that the baby was his child. Next, they inspected the child to ensure it was healthy. Blindness or deafness wasn't attested, by the way. After those two acceptances, the ceremony of Vatni occurred and they sprinkled fresh water on the baby. The last step was Nafnesti, a naming ritual. The father would state the child's name and bestow a gift, usually things like a ring, farmland, weapon, or even deer. This final acceptance made the baby officially a person, and any offense towards it would be penalized as if the baby was an adult. Number 2 is all kinds of ghastly, the blood eagle. The TV show Vikings brought this torture method to widespread attention. You've likely also seen it in TV show NBC Hannibal or the horror movie Midsommar, a Scandinavian-based film. It's a method of execution that could last hours and sometimes days, and it was rumored to have killed King Aleia in 867 AD. The punished was laid face down, restrained with his arms and legs spread, and an eagle was carved into the skin of his back before the skin was peeled back and ribs separated from the spinal cord with an axe. But we aren't done yet. The ribs and muscles are then pulled outwards to represent the wings of an eagle, and of course, salt was then pressed and rubbed into the wound. While the victim is still alive, his lungs are gently lifted out of the body to rest on the stretched out rib bones. As the victim died, his last breaths and the wind amongst him would make the lungs flutter like that of a bird's wing. Jesus, I don't even know how to follow that up with a witty comment, man. I think I'm gonna just move on to the next segment. So number 1 is somehow more grotesque. It's the Beserkers. We all know Vikings were absolute beasts in battle, so you had to know this list was gonna get a little darker towards the end. They had this thing called battle fury, which in recent times we have theorized to be the result of either intentional or accidental use of psychedelic and fungus. This could cause a self-induced hypnotic trance, resulting in them losing their sense of pain and conscious control of their movements. But nothing was more terrifying than a berserker. They took that battle fury and multiplied it by 100. They took on the appearance and behavior of either a bear or a wolf, even donning the pelt or the heads of their chosen animal. Oftentimes, that's the only garb they wore at all. Apparently, to reach this status, they lived out in the wild like their totem animal. Being stripped of humanity allowed them to take on the strength and mindset of that creature. So when they fought in battle, berserkers apparently used just their bare hands and teeth. And according to legend, they felt no pain and could keep fighting for hours despite any injury. They were said to have even ripped man limb from limb. Imagine going into battle in like 600 AD with an opposing army you've never seen before, and then it turns out it's a bunch of 6'11" dudes in animal skins out of their minds on psychedelics and carrying 7-foot swords. Yeah, alright, well thank you so much for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed this Nordic themed video, and be sure to comment down below if you want more like this. Also be sure to like and subscribe to see more of our Bumblebee content.